Florida State University. Her 12 books of poetry include partly new and selected poems 2001 to 2015, published last year, and Versed, which received the 2010 Pulitzer Prize and the 2009 National Book Circle Award in Poetry. Ron has all three of those books, which he will reference this evening. In 1998, she also published a prose memoir, True, and her collective prose was published in 2007. Armentrout's other honors include an award in poetry from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, 2 grants from the Fund for Poetry, and fellowships from the California Arts Council, the Rockefeller Center, and the Guggenheim Foundation. For almost 20 years, she taught at the University of California, San Diego, and now Armentrout lives in Everett, Washington, with her husband, Chuck. In the 4 years of presenting Life of a Poet, I have gotten to watch Ron work his magic with over a dozen poets, including many old friends. However, Ray is the first poet that I once interviewed who I now get to see in the series. Telling Ray about Life of a Poet over dinner last night, I got to thinking about what approach Ron would take, what topics and poems he'd delve into, how he'd direct the conversation, and even how he might ask us to take a break. And it made me realize anew how thankful I am for his vision and his commitment. I'm also eager to see what tonight's conversation will teach me about Ray's work. My interview with her 9 years ago began and ended with questions about meaning, from a phone bill to a dream. And I bet that by the time Ron and Ray are finished, we may know more about and be wonderfully mystified by what our language does for us. Please join me in welcoming Ron Charles and Ray.
Ron and Ray. Thank you all for coming very much. It's great to see you. And it's been a pleasure to read your poems.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. I've been waiting to ask you, do poems just pop into your head? You're laughing because that is the opening of a satirical poem you wrote about being interviewed by an unprepared journalist. You start with that poem?
Sure. In fact, what this person said was actually not do poems just pop into your head, but do words just pop into your head. And I kind of assume that words pop into everyone's head. How else do we ever say anything? So I decided that what I would do with this was right after I won the Pulitzer, so that meant that I had to do a lot of interviews, and some of them were, the interviews were prepared, and sometimes they weren't. Like the local paper in San Diego came out, and it's not a terribly good paper. I'm sorry, I just said that. Anyway, they hate me anyway. So I got asked some questions like this, and I decided the way to go with it when writing a poem was just to kind of put on a voice. And the questions are questions that I was really asked, and the answers are not the answers I gave. They're kind of an alter ego answer, a sort of a kind of, I imagine myself as a kind of dark persona when I'm answering questions. Okay, legacy. Do words just pop into your head? Some may go unexploded. Have you thought much about your legacy? I'm a legacy prisoner. No, I'm not. What do you call precious? The precious doesn't get around much, so it stays small, or it orbits the same small pronoun, a kid on a carousel. Look at me. It fiddles with itself, but I've got bigger things to pick up and put down.
Nice. Thank you very much. Now, when you win a prize like that, as you say, you do get interviewed a lot. It's one of the times during the year when the audience for poetry expands very large. You get interviewed on the McNeil NewsHour, for instance, right? You get interviewed in all the newspapers. NPR calls you. New York Times wants to do a profile. And you have to explain poetry to a general reader.
Yeah.
In a way that is sudden and maybe difficult. You've been associated with a group called the Language Poets since the 1970s. That's a particularly unilluminating label. The Language Poets. What else would they be?
Exactly. I've said that many times myself.
not as bad as New Criticism, which is a useless novel, but it's pretty bad.
Postmodernism,
Yeah.
postmodernism.
So what are the language poets?
Well, I can talk about what, I mean, one thing I could say is that we are, or we're a group of friends who developed an aesthetic together when we were kids. I mean, just kids, like Betty Smith was, in our 20s. That's one thing. We, of course, needless to say, didn't name ourselves the language poets, because who would do that? It's stupid. But that was something that was a name that a magazine called Poetry Flash came up with, and it somehow just stuck. And finally, we just sort of accepted it. And partly it came from a magazine that Bruce Andrews and Charles Bernstein edited that was called Language, but it had equal signs between all the letters of the word language. And so that was in New York, and so the poets who came to be called the language poets were either in New York or in San Francisco, and I was in San Francisco at the time. And, we were different, I think, in our aesthetics, the New York side and the San Francisco side, but we were also different as individuals. And the problem with, group labels is they're kind of homogenizing.
Right.
But I do think that, I did learn from being involved in that sort of group formation, group activity, group thinking together in community.
There must have been something about you that would distinguish you as a group. What would that be? How would you distinguish yourselves from the romantic poets, for example?
Yeah. We were definitely not romantic. I think we were coming of age and forming in the 70s, and we were coming out of the period of the Vietnam War.
You were protest poets?
Not directly, exactly, but we were sort of dealing with the fact of what happened to language during the Vietnam War, the spin, the having to destroy a village in order to save it, that kind of
distortion.
thing.
You were checking the political distortion of language.
Yeah, the Freedom Hamlets. Remember that if you're old enough, So, I think that those were early examples of what we now call spin. And yeah, distortions of language that made us both want to be very attuned to language and also sort of want to either unspin it or spin it in a different way. So that's one thing, a kind of attitude of suspiciousness, like what did I just hear? How can I parse that? How can I think about what it really means? What the motivation behind that remark might be? So that's one thing that we have in common, is a kind of desire that was both positive and negative to look at language as an object, sort of.
One critic says that language poetry intends for the reader to participate in creating the meaning of the poem. Which, I'm going to read that again because it doesn't make any sense. Language poetry intends for the reader to participate in the creating the meaning of the poem.
Probably readers always do that.
That's what I would think. Otherwise, you wouldn't be conscious when you're reading the poem. So how did that get to be associated with you all?
Well, I think that one thing that a lot of the language poets did is, and this is true of me too, in my own way, which is not the same as all of their ways, but is that units within a poem, whether the unit is a sentence or a stanza or a section, the units tend to be sort of semi-autonomous. They are something in themselves. And then how they connect with the next unit or the next sentence is sort of oblique and indirect. And I hope that there is a relation, but there's not a lot of walking the reader through it.
Yes. And different readers can come up with radically different reactions.
Right.
It would be equally valid.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about equally. I mean, I think one can push that argument too far. I mean, I think there are wrong ways to read poems. But there are definitely more than one right way.
Okay.
Number 3 here.
For like early poem.
my problem. It is my responsibility to squeeze the present from the past by demanding particulars. When the dog is used to represent the inner man, I need to ask, what kind of dog is it? If a parasitic metaphor grows all throughout, good. Why stop with a barnacle? A honeysuckle thrown like an arm around a chain-link fence would be far more articulated, more precisely repetitive, giving me the feeling that I can go on like this. While the woman at the next table says, "You smell pretty," and sends her small daughter's laugh, a spluttery orgasm, into my ear, though this may not have been what you intended. It may not be a problem when I notice the way the person shifts. Can I hold, you want this?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, when the dog is used to represent the inner man, I need to ask, what kind of dog is it? You're demanding, you're putting some pressure on the language within the poem, which is about language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, actually, for a long time I taught, and some of the material in the poem comes from things that I found myself saying to students.
You demanded particulars from that.
Yeah. Because, it's better for a poem to be specific. Or I think actually at that time, not that it matters, I was teaching a course called Personal Narrative, so this was actually prose. But, I'm sort of making fun of symbols there in a way. If the dog is used to represent the inner man,
yes.
So that's turning a dog into a symbol of yourself,
Yes.
which is the way we arrogant humans are. The dog must be me. So then, instead of saying to the student, well, isn't that kind of anthropomorphizing, sort of arrogant and problematic? Instead, I would say, well, what kind of dog is it? Just to, pull them into technically better writing by making them be more specific. So I'm sort of making fun of my own comments in a way, not so much making fun of the students.
Yes.
But, when you teach, you say the same kinds of things over and over until you get tired of yourself.
I remember thinking each fall, my God, these kids haven't learned anything, even though they were all new. Right?
Yeah.
Not the same students I was talking to last year. I love this poem because it makes me think about what poetry does in a very clever, creative, specific way. It isn't just about poetry.
No, I suppose not.
Right.
Part of it is just me taking in my environment. As a matter of fact, I was grading papers at a cafe, an outdoor cafe that I lived in San Diego. And there was a honeysuckle, and there was a woman with her daughter, and so everything around me is coming into my consciousness, and therefore sort of invading.
Another one called The Craft Talk, which is very specifically about the craft of poetry.
Right, and that's going to be in my upcoming book, Wobble. I'm advertising it. It's coming out next September.
Congratulations.
And this is a prose poem. So another thing that happens to me besides being interviewed is being asked to do craft talks. Some of you may be familiar with that. And in a craft talk, you are sort of asked to say what you think a good poem is, or what poetry should do. And I'm not very comfortable with prescriptions, being prescriptive. I mean, I have ideas about what poetry can do, but my problem is that I'm ambivalent about my own ideas. As soon as I have an idea, I go, is that true? Wait a minute, there's probably ways it's not true. So that's kind of what this comes out of. The craft talk. So that the best thing you could do, it seemed, was climb inside the machine that was language and feel what it wanted or was capable of doing at any point, steering only occasionally. The best thing was to let language speak its piece while standing inside it, not like a knight in armor, exactly, not like a mascot in a chicken suit. The best thing was to create in the reader or listener an uncertainty as to where the voice she heard was coming from, so as to frighten her a little. Why should I want to frighten her?
In your poems do that repeatedly. The voice switches on us in surprising ways. The tone switches. These are intentional things you're doing.
Hope so, yes. Although, actually that is a good question because it's intentional, I suppose, but it's also ingrained. It's also just the way I am. So maybe it's not intentional.
Even you're doing it to me now.
Yeah.
And you make fun of the idea of the poet as the authority who's in total control of the language. In your version, you would sort of mock that whole idea.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I do different voices
Yes.
in my poems. I suppose because it's famous, that the working title for The Wasteland was "He Do the Police in Different Voices."
I did not know that.
I love that. It should have been the title of The Wasteland, I think. But anyway.
No.
But, I do the police in different voices. So sometimes I'll just hear something, overhear something, or read something, and just want to take that voice wherever it can go, and take it further, and maybe take it to somewhere problematic that it seems like it has the potential to go. So there are plenty of voices in my poems saying things that, in a way, I don't stand by or mean. These voices just sort of run to where they go. And then I take a look at that, I guess.
Yes. Right. You say in one poem called Approximate, wait, I haven't found the right word yet. Poem means homeostasis. Word, I had a vague idea of what that word meant, but it's some sort of...
Poem doesn't really mean that, of course.
Yes. It's ironic. It's ironic, isn't it? Another poem you write, a word is mostly connotation, matter is mostly aura. Each poem says, I'm desperate.
Everything must go.
Yes, the sale. What do you mean by that? I'm desperate.
Which part of it?
The I'm desperate part. I like the energy of that. It suggests about the poet.
Can I see
Yes.
the whole poem? I think
That
it's
is from Make It New, right?
right. Make it new. So is that in? What's that in? Lost track of my word. So is it in next month? Okay, good. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Make It New is the title of that, and that's one of Ezra Pound's maxims. So it's one of the maxims of modernism. And when you're making it new, you have to get rid of the old. So each poem says, "I'm desperate, then everything must go." So it's kind of like a yard sale or a closing going out of business sale. Past has to go. And it's sort of that. This poem is sort of also constructed like a road trip. The steady pressure on the accelerator can be stipulated in advance, as can the stubby bushes, blurred and peripheral vision. So we know what we're going to see on this road trip. We've seen it before. We're going to see the same thing. A diner or a gas station comes up, tried evoking it while satirizing the impulse to do so. So in a way, it's a poem about being jaded until the end. What that name will be is the one thing we don't know.
Now read the whole thing.
Okay. Make it new. Shaking the parts of speech like fluff in a snow globe. The way sleep scrambles life's detritus. Each poem says, I'm desperate, then everything must go. To hear something familiar here leads to careful laughter. Go where? The steady pressure on the accelerator can be stipulated in advance, as can the stubby bushes, blurred in peripheral vision. And someone will have set down a diner or a gas station at a desolate crossroads and tried naming it to evoke the whole human situation while satirizing the impulse to do so. What that name will be is the one thing we don't know.
The way you do something and satirize it at the same time, yeah, amazes me. Peter's really good.
Thank you, I guess.
Also, I love the opening of that, shaking the parts of speech like a snow globe. It's a great metaphor. In a poem called Meant, you write, poetry wants to make things mean more than they mean, says someone, as if we knew how much things meant or in what unit of measure. Read that poem? It's called
Yeah.
Just Saying.
Finding it for me. It's towards the end. Meant. When the rat rests, its brain runs the maze again, then runs it backwards and repeats. This is early music. Poetry wants to make things mean more than they mean, says someone, as if we knew how much things meant and in what unit of measure. Some chords, crowds, seem sad because uncertain, while others appear quite resolved.
Poetry wants to make things mean more than they mean. What's going to think, yes, that's pretty profound. Then she immediately makes fun of that. As if we knew how much things meant, or what unit of measurement we were talking about. Even that opening line, if you hear it again, you'll see how funny it is. When the rat rests, its brain runs the maze again and runs backwards and repeats. This is early music.
I like Bach and Vivaldi, but you know, that's pretty good.
That's how it began. Yeah. In another poem you write, the string of words could be a worm or a needle passing in and out through some hole, stitching what to what. It's like you're about to tell us what poetry does, you're about to tell us how words connect things and make meanings, and then you make fun of that impulse to explain or define what poetry does, even as you are doing it. The way you involve us in that process. You remember a poem called Formal Constraints?
Oh yeah, just saying it's right there.
Even your title is sort of
This one's a little kinky. Formal constraints. Now the poem is saying what it is forced to say by its history, its form, thus pleasing the reader, who knows he can trust it without being obliged to regard any statements it may make as accurate or true. The poem is ridding itself and us of the burden of abstraction, a valuable service. Still, a question arises as to how to dispose of the poem once this divestment is complete.
explain that poem to us.
Well, poems often have formal constraints of some sort. So a poem might be forced in certain ways. I don't feel it. I mean, I suppose mine are too, sure. I mean, I learned a lot from modernism, from William Carlos Williams and such. I mean, poems are, have short lines and such. So, whether you're writing a sonnet or you're writing, sort of modernist / postmodernist poem, there's going to be expectations, habits, constraints that you're going to be obeying. But I sort of took off from the word constraints because you hear that a lot. You hear in the poetry world, because there can be different kinds of formal constraints besides the traditional, besides like a sonnet or something. You can decide that you're going to write, well, like Lynn Ginian's book, My Life, you're going to write 37 paragraphs, each of which is 37 sentences long. That's a self-invented formal constraint. Right? So you hear that phrase, constraints, but it sort of made me think about bondage. And so that made me think about serial killers. So there's a voice going on behind this poem, you know, like how to dispose of the body is sort of what's in the back of my mind there when I say, still a question arises as to how to dispose of the poem once this divestment, which of course means taking your clothes up, is complete. So, I don't know whether it's playful or not, but sometimes I just get a voice in my head that's sort of the devil made me do it, I guess.
Well, to talk about words. What can words say, you ask in one poem? And later in the same collection you say, what can description do? Tongues tapping the roofs of our mouths to make meaning. That is what language is,
Yeah.
ultimately,
Yeah.
logically.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
tapping our tongues at the top of our mouths. Why don't you read a poem called Spent?
Okay,
See how much I like this collection.
yeah.
What you just, now listen here to the way the meanings of words are being flipped line by line.
This one, by the way, also sort of came out of teaching and seeing what my students, who were young, as you point out, no longer knew about the meaning of words that they would know one meaning of a word. In the case of spent, it had to do with it. They thought it had to do with money, only with money, which it doesn't necessarily. But anyway, spent. Suffer, as in allow. List, as in want. Listless, as in transcending desire or not rising to greet it. To list is to lean dangerously to one side. Have you forgotten? Spent, as in exhausted.
And a poem, a poet, plays with all those meanings. Some meanings are contradictory or unrelated to one another at the same time. And this poem encapsulates that in a very self-conscious way. I remember explaining to a reporter at the Christian Science Monitor that we couldn't say sucked in the monitor. He had no idea that that had any sort of obscene
Oh, wow.
meaning. It becomes so common to him. He just say it. This is that he was rolling over in a grave. You talk about poems being a cure for loneliness. In another poem you write, language exists to pull things close. In another one you write, pattern recognition was our first response to loneliness. Such a beautiful line. In another poem you write, the feeling of emptiness is a pre-existing condition, one not covered by Obamacare. What have I pulled out here? In With, you say, I write things down to show others later, or to show myself that I am not alone with my experience. One of your poems ends, so much happiness is caged in language, ready to burst out any time and fade. It sounds so hopeful, and then...
Yeah, and then not.
Then not, yeah. Let's talk about metaphors and what those are. In a poem called Versed, you write, metaphor forms a crust beneath which the crevice of each experience. I love that more than I understand it. Can you explain it?
I could try. I thought that was a pretty good explanation of it. Yeah, well, I mean, metaphor forms a crust.
You're going to repeat it to me until I just nod and move on?
I think that a metaphor creates its own kind of surface. Metaphors can be clever. Metaphors carry, as we all know, something across from one sort of realm of discourse to another and connect it to like a bridge. Typically, you start to write because you've had some experience, and the experience may just be a thought or a feeling. I don't mean something happened to you necessarily, but it may have. And that experience starts you to want to write, and perhaps you come up with this metaphor, and the metaphor is like a little machine, and it connects these two things, one to the other. But once you've got this bridge, you know, the bridge kind of goes over the experience, I guess. And the experience is still there inside you. It doesn't stop being there inside you. And you've never plumbed it all, I mean, have you? So,
That's good. That's great. Thank you very much. I want you to read a poem called Integer, Reversed. This is the book for which you won the Pulitzer Prize, right?
yep,
The second part.
just read the second part, okay.
Uh,
Metaphor is ritual sacrifice. It kills the look-alike. No, metaphor is homeopathy. A healthy cell exhibits contact inhibition.
read it again.
Okay. Metaphor is ritual sacrifice. It kills the look-alike. No, metaphor is homeopathy. A healthy cell exhibits contact inhibition.
Give us two definitions of metaphor there. You give one, then you immediately contradict it.
Mhm.
Homeopathy is not a word we use very much anymore. It used to be you would give someone a poison in a very diluted amount that would induce in a healthy person the conditions they're suffering from.
Or so they say.
And that was thought to cure them. So,
Yeah. Mhm.
right. Those two why those two definitions of metaphor? What are you suggesting?
Well, I can explain the first one. I'm not sure that I can explain the homeopathy one. But metaphor is ritual sacrifice. It kills the look-alike. I think in metaphor there's always one term, or usually there's one term that's privileged over the others. And what the thing is like usually gets developed further than the thing. Right?
Yes.
So it's like the thing, well, tenor of the metaphor, which is the sort of technical literary term, the thing you're really talking about gets subsumed by the vehicle of the metaphor, which is the way you're describing it. And that takes over. It sort of replaces the original. And then a healthy cell exhibits contact inhibition. That has a specific meaning. You know what kind of cells don't exhibit contact inhibition and continue to grow into other cells? Cancer cells. So I guess the whole thing is sort of playing around with metaphor as cancer. And then homeopathy is a kind of medicine, so that makes it kind of sense.
You say in one poem, do you believe this metaphor? And you once asked an interviewer, you told an interviewer, metaphor should make us suspicious, but we can't do without it.
No, I don't think we can. I mean, I think it's just a natural human propensity.
Jenny Holzer, you know her works.
Yeah.
I noticed points of comparison between the two.
No, that, I don't know that. Tell me about it.
In later poems. Certain lines just sound very aphoristic to me, very much like the kind of thing she would put in lights at the museum. What if every moment is a best guess on a pop quiz? That could be her, couldn't it? It's you.
Yes.
The idea that we can improve is a form of self-grooming. Definitely see that in lights at the MoMA. To incorporate change without disorientation is to win. Very aphoristic lines.
It is, but I'm
those
sure,
things are
I'm
very-
sure that the lines around them destabilize.
Completely, yes. And these are in your later poems. It was not the kind of thing you did in your earlier poems. What did you learn studying Emily Dickinson? I know that was an influence.
Oh, well, I don't know that I exactly learned technically from Dickinson because I feel like she is so far above me and so far above all of us. I admire her so much. Her word choice is so original, like a narrow fellow in the grass. I mean, whoever would put the word narrow next to the word fellow? You know, no one. So, I mean, she is just amazingly original. If I learned anything from her as a young woman, it would be just her boldness, I guess. Just her, I mean, whatever she did in her personal life, in her poetry, she was absolutely fearless.
Yes.
So,
Necromance. This poem made me think of it. Doesn't look it like one of her poems, but
what do you mean, October? Okay.
October, it sort of sounds, sort of echo.
October. Beauty appeals like a cry for help that's distant or inhuman, so foreclosed. We say ablaze because we can't stand it, red and yellow, nearing or nearly turning toward.
That's how the poem ends.
Yeah, well, we don't know turning toward. Turning toward what? The leaf, it's just sort of about turning leaves in October,
Right.
but turning toward.
The images are surprising. It's both concrete and abstract at the same time. It points to something very concrete and ordinary, but at the same time something very profound in a way that reminds me of her. Let's take a break. Just stand up and turn around. Don't leave the room. This is not an intermission. Keep your legs circular so they don't,
I'm gonna kind of disconnect it if I can.
yeah, roll. Okay, that's it. Sit back down. I hear Dickinson most in your work when you talk about God, because I knew from the memoir your theological background of your parents at least, but I could not develop any kind of theology from the poems themselves. But there are references to God in several poems.
Right.
And it's a very Dickensian approach. It's ironic, it's sometimes sarcastic, it's very much an acknowledgement of his power and a poke in the divine eye at the same time. My self-reflection shames God into watching. So good. My self-reflection shames God into watching. If we are made in God's image, God is impatient without really knowing what he wishes would occur. If we read functions to us.
Sure. Okay. Functions. We inquire about heaven as we might about a nursing home. Will I get email there? Will I have insights and someone to be pleased with them? Will that person be faking it? Will she be under orders? Will my words seem foreign? Twee, twee, some sound insists.
I think it's never would have written a poem like that. She wouldn't even know some of those words. And yet, there's the same kind of attitude.
Yeah, that's one thing that originally drew me to Dickinson is exactly that, because I was raised in this, my mother was an evangelical. So, this kind of very literalist interpretation of the Christian Bible. And I became an agnostic, I guess, at the age of 12. So that created some problems in the household. And so when I first was reading Dickinson, I saw that she was struggling with that too. She was under a lot of pressure to theologically conform, and she didn't. I mean, I think she doubted God. She also she went back and forth, I think, between believing and not believing, but she also sort of wanted to poke at God's authority,
He fumbles at your soul.
Yeah,
An
right.
acknowledgement of his power,
But also it seems intrusive, right? Yeah.
an acknowledgement of his incompetence.
Yeah, that too.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing, is the way that she just isn't afraid to say that way back in the middle 19th century.
Right.
I'm a woman too.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I guess my attitude about religion is that, on the one hand, at least the kind of religion that I grew up with, I grew up with praying, and so sometimes if I really feel threatened or something, I still have a tendency to want to say a prayer. But then I mean, it seems so creepy to me, like asking a personal favor of a Lord. I'm sorry if some of you are no doubt religious, but it seems so feudal, like feudalistic, you know. Lord, let me. And the whole language, the whole construction of it is so hierarchical, right? And authoritarian. And that put me off. And maybe it was an anti-patriarchal feeling that I had, the whole sort of feudal court patriarchy of religion as I was introduced to it put me off. But having said that, there's still, I guess, a sense of reaching inside me that doesn't know what it's reaching for, but it's reaching. I think there's something sort of excessive about human consciousness. It's more than we need to survive. You know, the sense of beauty, right? The sense of kind of the whole self-consciousness thing, which is so extreme with humans, is more than we need, really, to survive. So what's that for, you know? I'm not saying necessarily that because it exists, God must exist. I'm just saying that because it exists, we reach out to something that must be beyond us, or that we wish were beyond us because we have all of this sort of extra consciousness to play with, you know, to look at the universe with.
The brain is bigger than the sky.
Yeah, there we go.
You write in one poem, like God, I will leave an arc of implication.
Oh, that poem is, yeah. Mother's Day. Yeah, I sort of play God in that poem.
It's such a good comment on the speaker and God, an arc of implication. In Solution, you write, you're the thing that waits to trap each passing thought, the anxious blank that God loves. Another poem called Prayer.
Yeah.
In a collection called Money Shot.
Right.
A surprisingly crude reference.
Well, I wrote Money Shot pretty much during the financial crisis.
Yeah, so it does not refer to the...
Well, I mean, I was certainly aware of the reference. But, you know, the Money Shot in porn, as everyone knows, I guess, is where the man proves that he's enjoyed himself. So it's about, you know, like, show me the money, I guess, in a sense, you know, the moment of truth, so to speak.
Prayer.
Prayers, actually, plural. We pray, and the resurrection happens. Here are the young again, sniping and giggling, tingly as ringing phones. All we ask is that our thinking sustain momentum, identify targets. The pressure in my lower back rising to be recognized as pain. The blue triangles on the rug repeating. Coming up, a discussion on the uses of torture. The fear that all this will end. The fear that it won't.
I felt like that often this year. Shifting gears, in a way, are a number of poems that have to do with physics
Yeah,
and astrophysics,
right?
in a way that sometimes becomes ontological and theological, but sometimes is very surprisingly technical.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that come from? Did you study physics? Did you study astrophysics?
I'm not in school.
Astronomy?
Well, so there's a lot to be said about that. First of all, I think that I got interested in physics and cosmology because it asks some of the same questions that religion asks.
Yes.
How did the universe begin? How will the universe end? why is the universe here, although it doesn't really answer that question. But so I think that's why I got interested in physics, is because it asks us really big questions. And yeah, I started reading those popular physics books for lay people.
Like Cosmos, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like Brian Greene's book, The Elegant Universe,
Yes.
and The Fabric of the Cosmos, and not just Brian Greene, but, you know, Lee Smolin, and Lisa Randall, and Carlo Rovelli, and so I've read a lot of those books.
Yeah.
And so I picked up some of the lingo, and I think I know something about it, but I'm certainly not an expert. I mean, to really know physics, you have to understand the math, because physics is math.
Yeah.
So basically, when you read one of those books and you're not doing the math, you're reading metaphors. I mean, you know, your physicists are trying to tell you what they found out by various metaphors. And
Because
some
they
of
aren't
them,
actually strings.
some of them are good at, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And some of them are good at creating metaphors, some are better than others. But, you know, you're getting a kind of metaphorical top layer beneath which is really math. And I can't get to the math. But I'm very interested in it. But also I read it because it provokes me to write. And it provokes me to write because I get to a place that I don't understand. And that sense of puzzlement is often what starts a poem for me. Whether the poem's about physics or theology or even popular culture. But why is that popular? You know, anything that leaves me not quite understanding can lead into a poem somehow. And since that happens so often with physics books,
Yes.
and once I found out that I could end up writing a poem by reading a physics book, I went, oh, I'll read more physics books.
Yeah, it's very surprising to me. You have a favorite here? A scale, human, simple?
Okay, well, simple's more about biology, really, but, yeah, well, can we do two or can we
Oh,
just do
sure.
one? Okay, well, let's do simple and maybe scale, sure.
Okay.
Simple's inversed. And it's dedicated to my son, Aaron Korkigian, who's a biologist. So this is, I guess we were talking about evolution, and he thought that I was anthropomorphizing it. And I didn't mean to, but that's language for you. You know, it's hard to talk about processes without dynamic processes without speaking as if there were agents behind them somehow. So anyway, here's the poem. Oh, and also this is what we haven't talked about. Sorry. Simple. Complex systems can arise from simple rules. It's not that we want to survive, it's that we've been drugged and made to act as if we do. While all the while the sea breaks and rolls painlessly under. If we're not copying it, we're lonely. Is this the knowledge that demands to be passed down? Time is made from swatches of heaven and hell. If we're not killing it, we're hungry.
That opening line is refers to like how could we have eyeballs or
Yeah.
livers or complicated physical things which started from very simple systems, right?
Yeah, yes.
Biological, a premise of evolution.
Right. That's
Good to have you. Right. You take this in a different direction. Talk about the direction you take that.
Well, okay, so this whole book, not the whole book, I'm sorry, like half the book was written in the wake of my being diagnosed with cancer. And not just any cancer, not a common cancer, no, a cancer no one had ever heard of. I mean, someone had, but adrenal cortical cancer, which is vanishingly rare and also super deadly. And so, like, almost no one survives. So I did, though. But
It's great.
it's great. But of course, I didn't think I was going to because, you know, when I read about it, it was like, 5% maybe survive. So, basically I was getting my affairs in order, even though they got the whole tumor out and they didn't see any more cancer. But the doctors I talked to went, well, we see no evidence of disease now. But, I was just waiting for it to come back, right? So I wrote this book, or half of this book, and, even for a while after that, I sort of wrote under the idea that I was going to die. So I was, in a way, talking about this sort of the cruelty of life. So, it's not that we want to survive, it's that we've been drugged and made to act as if we do. But I mean, that's a sort of is that true? Maybe it's true if you think of the sort of biochemicals in our body as drugs, that we have a reward system, and one of the things we're rewarded for by our dopamine and our serotonin is doing things that help our survival, right? Eating, so in a way you could say that we're drugged and made to act as if we wanted to survive. It's not that we wake up from childhood and we're 2 and we go, you know what I want to survive. It's not like we really have a choice about wanting to survive. That was foisted on us. So the poem kind of goes on from there.
Let's read one of the more physics-oriented poems.
Okay.
Would that be Scale?
Scale would work.
Conclusion?
Let's go. Okay, is conclusion in itself? Let's see. Let me look at it. Yes, it's kind of, yeah.
I like the way it becomes very theological.
Oh, right.
Begins with
We
physics.
can talk about both of those
Begins with
things.
physics, ends with God.
Yeah, it's starts with cosmology, I guess, and the man I'm referring to is Stephen Hawking here. Conclusion. A man is upset for many years because he's heard that information is destroyed in a black hole. Question. What does this man mean by information? The example given is of a cry for help, but this is accompanied by the image of a toy spaceship upended and is thus not to be taken seriously. The man recovers his peace of mind when he ceases to believe in passing through, when he becomes convinced that the lost information is splattered on the event horizon. The detective is the new mime. She acts out understanding the way a mime climbs an invisible wall. It's because our senses are so poor that on CSI, the investigators stand stock still, boulders in a stream, while a crowd pours around them. They pan in slow motion, reminding us of cameras, then focus with inhuman clarity on the pattern of cracks in a wall. God's fractal stammer pleasures us again.
That is a whiplash of a poem. It goes all over the universe, literally. It's always about information, though.
Yeah,
Turning that
I guess
turn.
you're right, yeah.
If you understand, not the most basic understanding of what physicists mean by information, but then you're playing with pop culture and this TV show, their information. It's a very different kind of information.
And detectives, you're right, detectives on TV, and I think this was probably, I don't really watch CSI, but I must have seen, a preview for it. I'm sure I saw this image where it must have gone into slow-mo, and the investigator was, panning, reminding us of cameras, then focused with inhuman clarity. But it's kind of a Sherlock Holmes moment, right, of being able to see the pattern. And yeah, right. And then were you going to say something about the end?
You say something too. I think it's gorgeous and baffling.
God's fractal.
It's also going to use that as a title for a book someday.
God's
God's
fractal.
fractal. which is great.
Yeah, well, fractals are, some of you may know, sort of recursive repeating patterns in nature.
Never more complex.
Yeah, right. And we enjoy them. I mean, when you see something that is a fractal pattern, you're going to find it pretty, so I think that's just human nature. So I guess it sounds in the poem like this is a trick God's playing on us, or worse, that God's fumbling at our soul with this.
Yeah, well, it sounds like he's in
Or
charge.
something else. He might have his hand somewhere else.
Right.
What is us again?
We're God's fractals in a way, the ever multiplying complexity of our own lives,
Thoughts
our
and,
own thoughts. Right. Arrangements. One more.
Oh, I forgot. You know more
Yeah.
than I do about this.
It's in Next Life.
Okay. Yeah, this is not one I think about very often. Arrangements. The way the ancient explosion has arranged itself, at the bus stop, a hunched woman with sparse auburn hair, above a Peter Pan collar, blue jumper, Mary Jane's. What novelty has always promised, claiming to first coalesce, make cleave unto, is almost as last scattering surface, variation in air pressure, angel voices.
That is a poem that begins with a big bang
Yeah, it does.
and immediately moves to a bus stop,
Mm-hmm.
which is a big, big.
Well, the way the ancient explosion has arranged itself,
We are that.
we're that. And so so it's anything you're seeing is the way the ancient explosion has arranged itself. It's this room, right? Or at the time that I was writing this, that's what I looked at and saw. I guess I was probably in a car when I had that impression of seeing a woman at a bus stop. And thinking, well, there's something touching about her, something poignant that made me remember her. And I just thought, well, that's one thing that the Big Bang has arranged, is this moment with her in it.
Yeah, it's very, it's a very theological moment to be reminded that everything, even the most pedestrian moments, are arrangements of that ancient, incomprehensible explosion.
It's theological if you think that God ordered up the Big Bang. Well, we don't know that.
It's cosmological.
I don't know that, but you know.
No, it's ontological
Yeah.
or something. Yeah, it makes our ordinary life seem suddenly much vaster.
Yeah.
To attach it back to that. I want to end with a poem that has nothing to do with anything we've talked about, which made me laugh while traveling through the yard.
Okay. Yeah, that's a parody.
It's an early book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this does a version of a famous poem called Traveling Through the Dark. That poem, you probably know it, is by William Stafford. So this is Traveling Through the Yard from William Stafford. It was lying near my back porch in the gaudy light of morning, a dove corpse, oddly featherless, alive with flies. I stopped, dustpan in hand, and heard them purr over their feast. To leave that there would make some stink. So thinking hard for all of us, I scooped it up, heaved it across the marriage counselor's fence.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
See if this works. Yep. Thanks to you both. As I said in the beginning, there are books for sale outside, courtesy of our local bookstore. get some of those books, read some of Ray's poems, get her to sign her books, and come back in the spring for the continuation of Life of a Poet with Ron Charles. Thank you.